Good morning, good day, good evening, whenever you happenstance into this latest Truth Bomb riff by your friend Patrick Lovell on, what are we, Thursday? We're Wednesday, I guess. Wednesday, July 5th, 2023 at approximately 10:20 a.m. my time. And I hope that everybody had a terrific July 4th. I did. And beautiful weather where I am. Got a chance to see a lot of cool things throughout the day, and the evening was a sort of a masterful fireworks display downtown where I live that was set to music, and tens of thousands of people showed up, and it was just a lot of fun. And I will say that I was interested to see if I would see a lot of MAGA hats. In concert with everything else, because there was a DJ and there was a pretty broad swath and a multicultural sort of downtown like audience in any city in America. And, I was curious to see if there would be any support from those in red hats. And, because on Twitter, you saw that in South Carolina and everywhere else. I mean, there's this deluge of this, um, I don't know, support for President Trump and all of its manifestations. And I've been crazy on Twitter responding and reacting to what I find just to be ridiculous and laughable and absurd, but at the same time, extremely dangerous. I see Donald Trump in this effigy of him bowing like he's giving thanks to Jesus, and that he's sacrificing for your sins and all of that sort of thing. And, in addition, patriotic. Trump also took the image of Indiana Jones and all of these other things. And I thought to myself, I mean, it's absurd and it's crazy and it's insane, and it makes me very, very, very motivated to do what has to be done on many fronts. But to stay within the point at the moment, during this fireworks display last night that was extremely inspiring and patriotic and wonderful and all of those things, and I experienced it with my son, which we had a blast, and it was cool. And there was a moment where a handful of teenage youth got a little rambunctious and started, basically jumping up and down and shouting USA, USA. And I guess it was cool under any circumstances, but I found it fascinating, right? They didn't have red hats on, but they were teenage white youth, all looking relatively athletic. So I would imagine there were a lot of high school football players, that type of thing. And they were having fun, and they were largely enthusiastic. But it was interesting because as they were chanting USA, 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 I looked around at all of the people that weren't white, sort of high school jocks, sort of thing, and many of them weren't chanting USA, USA. And I found that an interesting corollary and a juxtaposition, because you could tell everybody was awfully patriotic. They wouldn't be there for the fireworks display, were they not? But a lot of other people, I believe, and maybe I'm just speculating and getting it wrong, but I think that they recognized and felt like, this MAGA movement, if that's what these kids might have been celebrating in the moment, weren't embraced by everyone who wasn't part of that demographic, so to speak, right? And it had nothing to do with being anti-patriotic. It had everything to do with not being what looks like a sort of an expression of white supremacy. And it was interesting, to say the least, the dynamic. So I'll leave it at that. I don't know if I've got the right read on it. Maybe it means nothing, but at the same time, I'm kind of like, well, if it is what I'm revealing, and as you can tell, I'm a white guy, right? And I'm also, to be honest with you, and I'm sure you can tell, very patriotic. In fact, that's what drives me like nothing else, quite frankly. And it's like I'm on a crusade, and it's a patriotic crusade, but it's premised on. So, for example, I woke up yesterday morning, and before we went to a variety of parades and shows and all sorts of different things throughout the day, I wanted to set the table with my son, because we were talking about a lot of this stuff. And I ended up putting all of the same sort of juxtaposition on Twitter, but I think it framed where my mindset is, and it expressed the energy of it. So the first thing I did was we listened to an actor voice Thomas Paine's "Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death" speech in the Continental Congress, 1776, I believe, was the time period that he did that, because it had to have been right before what ultimately happened. Of course, with the Declaration of Independence. But what an incredibly inspiring speech! And of course, the sort of genesis of it all was just look around at the actions of the English Empire and King George III. They express, a way to work through a problem, and that we can deal with our friends in the colonies, our allies in the colonies, and yes, you'll continue to serve the king, but we'll send our military and we'll send our navy, and we're just going to keep things a little bit straight, but at the same time, you have a partner in us, and we're all on the same team here, right? Well, of course, the Patriots or the founding fathers and everybody involved with the American Revolution were like, no taxation without representation, and the rest of history that I hope most of you are aware of or know. And but his words were so brilliantly crafted to make you realize that in the vacuum of the spirit of independence and courage to recognize and call out and ultimately to lay your life on the line against tyranny, that's the black and white causation of the United States. That bondage, slavery, was not going to be tolerated by the white gentile class that didn't want to be slaves to King George III. And of course, then later they created the two-thirds clause and all that kind of stuff because, of course, freedom and liberty was for everybody that was white and landowners versus what took, over, I don't know, the last 247 years to continue the struggle. And of course, we had the Civil War, which I then played for my son, the Gettysburg Address. So we listened to Thomas Paine's "Give Me Liberty" or "Give Me Death" speech, then Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, which was incredible because the way my son reacted was the way I just laid out right now about two-thirds clause and everything else, and he was trying to reconcile that. And I said, "Yeah, son, but the bottom line is that fervent liberty was there from the very beginning against all of the the compromised ills, if you will, of flawed human beings, particularly white, that use slavery to run the economy of the South. And of course, then once they decided to secede, that was enough for the powers that be at that time to basically pull together the principles of what the abolitionists. I always get that word kind of tongue-tied. Abolitionists had been saying from the very beginning, of which Thomas Jefferson, by the way, had significant philosophical alignment with, but he himself had called out his own hypocrisy, but in the name of compromise, because fight first things first. And of course, I happened to say to my son and a friend of mine yesterday, one of the biggest challenges at that time is how are you going to communicate the grand visions of these philosophers from France at that time and these wonderful humanistic sort of ambitions to people that can't read. I'm not saying that as a sort of disrespect or anything else. My point is there was a pragmatic sort of element of education at that time period that only the people that knew and understood a certain level of intelligence could actually work through the problem to challenge the tyranny of King George III. And they did, because they were intellects, quite frankly, and they were also patriots. And you put those two things together, and you can have a very powerful force, especially in the words of Thomas Paine and Abraham Lincoln, and of course Jefferson and many others. But those two particularly stood out to me yesterday that I wanted to, sequence and listen to with my son, prior to going out and doing, the wave the flag and the fireworks and all the rest of it. But, I followed that up with then FDR's speech at Madison Square Garden in, I believe, 1936 when he was running for second term. And, his, the bankers or organized money is as dangerous as organized mob, and that never has there been a time in history where the concerted hatred of the financial and business class united in their hate against somebody, and I welcome their hate. That's what FDR said, and it was brilliant. So I was able to demonstrate this sort of chronology. And my son's very well aware of this stuff. He just graduated from high school, and we've, gone through all this stuff, through his high school studies. But the long and the short of it is the revolution to the Civil War, the Emancipation Proclamation, and of course to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And then, of course, I played Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech to kind of create that continuity from the beginning to 1963. Of course, at the Lincoln Memorial, where Abraham Lincoln, where Martin Luther King gave one of the most brilliant speeches in the history of the world underneath the gaze of Abraham Lincoln, whose Gettysburg Address is right up there. And so that's my continuity, quite frankly, right? Particularly within this concept that I'm trying to promote to you guys to become part of what it is that I'm trying to achieve for all of us because of the information that I have and I've accrued and I've got to great lengths and sacrificed everything that I have to be able to get into a position that's just so simple and ridiculously easy. But it's just this, again, you have to use these parables always to paraphrase, to make the analogies, right? That it's like, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, did it fall? Of course it did, unless, of course, you can't see the forest for the trees. And that's how this whole thing works. There's an obfuscation, there's deception, there's, misdirection, there's misinformation. There's so many things that tongue tie and brutalize and do this sort of Orwellian sort of juxtaposition where language becomes a trope, where it's, it makes you aspire to certain ideals, but then are deceptive to manipulate you out of the freedom and liberty that you think that it's talking about. Okay, so that's doublespeak, right? And to me, I'm just a straight shooter. Look, what I'm bringing to you that nobody else can or will, and there's one presidential candidate at the moment that's getting closer, but then he's got a lot of controversy surrounding him as well, so I'm not sure if he's going to go all the way, and media has a huge role in all of this stuff, but the simple fact is that we are not a democracy, and the integrity of law that holds power to account doesn't exist. That's what I'm telling you. So in the grand scheme of the American trajectory, there's only one thing to do to deal with it. Drum roll, revolution. Now, what kind of revolution does it take? Do you foresee this generation of Americans overcoming what I'd call the tools in the full circus in the zombie apocalypse that's manifesting throughout MAGA world, which I always, typify on my Twitter feeds as the cartoons from They Live, the great Rowdy Piper who has his glasses on to see the truth, and he's always looking at these zombies that are trying to murder everybody, and he's going to fight against it because that's what he has to do. That's what a courageous American would do. It's like, wait, this guy's a threat. That's what I'm doing to the frickin' betrayers of democracy and the integrity of law. And my come from has always been the American dream, upward mobility. You get what you deserve in society based on your value, meaning that you come up with a great idea, you're able to manifest it in the market, people buy it, see a need, fill a need, and you become wealthy. Good for you. And then hopefully you build a vertical and there's a healthy dynamic structure attached to it, and that's all based on management. Yeah, we've seen that. The exploitative model of the neoliberal machine based on globalism over the course of 4 to 5 decades, based on a financial model, has given us this. We're a corporate fascist state undergirded by a criminal syndicate that uses socialism to fuel the mafiocracy that is now fueling hatred and fascism. And because I'm a patriot, I am completely at loggerheads with the two-front war that we, the people who believe in liberty and justice for all based on the integrity of law, have got to mass in unison to the tunes of tens of millions to be able to create a fight against the two-front war, which is corruption and then the fascism that it fuels and births. So billionaires and multi-billion-dollar multinationals spend billions of dollars to corrupt Congress, to corrupt the judiciary, to corrupt and buy the media, so that you live under the gun of tyranny. But they do it, and this is the biggest trick of all. And I always like to say the greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince the world he didn't exist. The biggest trick of all is that they use the full faith and credit of the United States because the billionaires spend billions to grift trillions. which is socialism for the rich, which is tyranny. And I'm talking about the ultra, ultra rich. Now, are there people that are in the top 1% that benefit from this? Yeah. Do I hold them accountable if they're doctors or accountants or dentists or entrepreneurs or anybody else? No. There's the financial apparatus made up of asset managers, the biggest ones that rule the world because of what I continue to reveal to you, BlackRock and Vanguard and State Street. But BlackRock, I think, has got north of what, $9 trillion under assets, and you never heard about them before 2008. And there's a reason for that, which is exactly the intersection of the revelation of everything that I'm telling you, which is the largest truth that has ever happened, maybe in history. And that's not hyperbole considering what I'm telling you. And so what I'm doing is I'm trying to create a massive populist tidal wave crusade based on justice warriors who seek the truth, to understand that this system that had to manifest over the course of hundreds of years to give the vote to women and to African Americans and to other people of color, based ultimately on education. If you don't have an education and you're not an informed citizen, I don't think you should be able to vote. I'm saying that kind of loosely and tongue in cheek because I guarantee you, if we had a citizenship test at the booths for two things, let's put it two things. One is if citizens had to, instead of getting an identification card and that all that hoopla that was going down a couple of years because of a state issued identification card, because poor people, particularly of African American color, can't get them because of some sort of potential problem because of their background checks and that sort of thing, so that they then don't vote in the gerrymandered sort of districts and all that kind of manipulation. All right, so you have to have an education to be an informed citizen. And so if you turn the tables and you actually had a citizenship test, do you think MAGA could exist? Do you think somebody like Marjorie Taylor Greene or Lauren Boebert or even, quite frankly, Jim Jordan, I'll be honest with you, although Jim Jordan's a little smarter than the rest of those people, or George Santos, for example, the bottom of the barrel is so ridiculous. If they had to take a basic citizenship test, the aforementioned couldn't pass it. They couldn't get into Congress. And if you had a citizenship test where you just had the basics of American history and what our laws are and what our amendments are and what the Constitution is, and all of these people that thump the Constitution as it's the Bible, they don't have a fucking clue about anything, let alone the history of the United States, let alone all of the things that took place with what I just mentioned to you, from Thomas Paine to the Gettysburg Address to Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, and of course FDR at Madison Square Garden in 1936. Which is basically fuck the bankers and corruption to get the New Deal, which is what I'm telling you. We've got to get the clean New Deal, because ultimately what I've revealed to you in our monumental Herculean work that I pray, even though I don't pray for much, but I just want to emphasize to you that if millions of you understood the truth, you'd be informed. You wouldn't have the system piss on your head telling you it's right. If you go to www.thecon.tv, and I know we're on vapors right now. I was told that it was going to get pulled last Friday. Let's see, it's Monday, I guess. It's still there. I don't know why it's there. It's not going to be there for much longer, but you can still get what I call the $29 trillion truth, which is exactly what it is. Because what we prove to you is what I've just said in metaphors and everything else for the 47-second bandwidth types, but I'll get to the whole point of it all. I am the only guy, and that doesn't make me walk on water or be able to part the Red Sea, but I am the only guy that can give you the details, soup to nuts, of the largest racketeering criminal enterprise in history. That it happened in a number of different areas, but most notably in the 2008 great financial crisis, built on the housing bubble that sent a housing economy of about $4.6 trillion at that time to a $600 to $800 trillion derivatives meltdown that then ultimately blew up the world, led to 50 million Americans getting destroyed, many of whom committed suicide, got divorced, collateral damages. Kids, didn't become what they could have been because of all of these ginormous problems to the nuclear family, which I love, the nuclear family and the American dream. So conservatives out there should appreciate that aspect of where I'm coming from. But the long and the short of it is, it was financial terrorism to the likes that was so far beyond 9/11, even though 9/11, in terms of the spectacle and 3,000 Americans being pulverized on that day, which is horrific, and 4 million lives lost in 20 years of war in the Middle East, which is significant. But financially, all of those wars supposedly are now in the $8 trillion range, which is incredible. What I'm revealing to you took $29 trillion to rescue the global financial criminal racket that our financial system became. It's not capitalism, it's corruption, it's racketeering. And then ultimately, what they did was, because they blew up the world with this racketeering enterprise that we show you in the con, step by step by step by step, that if the DOJ and the Congress and the Supreme Court were all actually legit and they had the con, we would have put all of the CEOs of Wall Street in prison. We would have nationalized the banks. We would have got rid of all the bad players, and then we would have sold it to private guys, and we would have reconstituted the law, because that's what a nation that actually has the law above crime would do. But we don't, because there's too many people, professionals in the system, that are willing to let the masses out there get destroyed based on a facade that they can actually just press a button to manifest trillions of dollars for themselves that they got illegally. That's the biggest thing of all. The two biggest points that I bring that nobody else has even come close to is the revelation that the general counsel of Sullivan and Cromwell, a gentleman by the name of Roger Cohen, was before the Federal Crisis Inquiry Commission. I believe it was 2011-12 when this took place, where he admitted that there was no legal precedent for the Fed to do what it did, which was to create $29 trillion of emergency lending programs to get Wall Street completely back on track after they buried the fucking world. And of course, they paid themselves huge bonuses and everything else. And yeah, they did pay the $29 trillion back, and there's a methodology to that. It's really easy to pay money back when you get free money and you can charge it out at interest, okay? That's first and foremost. But the financiers went right back to all of the games that they've done all along, and we've been living with the aftermath since. So much so that we got another $22 trillion for the financial system in 2020. 19, and then there was, I still don't know what the sum total is of of what we could maybe pin down if we did an audit of the trillions that went through COVID relief and everything else, but to Wall Street to prop up the stock market, because there's so much more to it. It's like 0% interest, and then we had quantitative easing the whole time, where we were buying so-called toxic bonds from the primary dealer brokers, which are the too big to fail banks. They got free money, and then they sold their fucking assets to the government, which then puts the full faith and credit of the United States to sell it around the world. And then there's an illegal element there, as well as laundering from all over the world and extraction and everything else. It's the criminal syndicate in the dark side has got complete control of power. And so if you, me, and everyone you see who isn't a Nazi, that champions decency and dignity, integrity, and liberty and sustainability, and we merge in unity, we will have the power to thwart and triumph over the tyranny of misery, and that is our destiny. All of this is about the Clean New Deal. And ultimately, the way I'm going to do it is I got to continue doing these podcasts, and if we get enough people to build, we can fund these podcasts. I can do them professionally. I've already got access to some of the smartest people and the best people. I hate to sound like Donald Trump, but really the right people that can give us insights that you're not going to see anywhere else. You're not going to see it on mainstream. We all know that mainstream is a deceptive high school fucking racket. It depends on where you fit in terms of your ideology as what they're trying to prey on, but they're all owned by the same 6 companies, and they all serve the power, and they all are making sure that you don't know this information that I'm revealing to you, which destroyed over 100 million people worldwide and gave these guys, now we're talking north of $70 trillion since 2009. Do you think $70 trillion could go to better, more productive uses in society and, quite frankly, efficient? Oh, you bet your ass. If only we were able to thwart corruption. And so we've got to raise money, because billionaires spend billions to steal, loot, grift trillions. And Donald Trump is that guy, among others, okay? And the bottom line is, this has got to be the anti-MAGA movement. This is the ultimate great reckoning, not the great awakening, as Russell Brand likes to say, the great reckoning, because I've got all of the answers. And if you invest $13 into this initiative, which is a exodus from corruption and a resurrection of the American dream, that we the people will break the bonds of these lies and deception and betrayal of bondage by the truth. and the truth and the light shall set you free. I hate to use all of these cliches, but it's the goddamn truth. And the bottom line is, I've got all of the answers. Again, it's not rocket science, it's racketeering. And if you watch The Con, you'll understand what that means. And also, if you check out the New Untouchables on The Real Progressives, check out Patrick Lovell, Truth Bombs The Con on TikTok and YouTube. Please like and subscribe and share, most of all. But above all else, if you give us $13, and it's a one-time ask for $13, because you got to pay to play in the United States. If you're not invested in something, you're the product. Have you not realized that about all of free media? And the long and the short of it is that the only way we're going to get the attention of the mainstream and everything else is if millions of you join me with the truth and we uphold it and we say to the world, these guys have been lying to us the whole time. And fuck them, fuck corruption, fuck fascism, liberty and justice for all, and that's who we are. Failure is not an option. Rise, roar, revolt. Onwards and upwards, my friends. Thank you for listening.